Well, welcome and thank you for joining us for a community conversation on social media and youth. I'm Lipper-Garabedian, the state representative for the 32nd Middlesex District, which includes Melrose, Wakefield, and Malden. In my capacity as state representative, I've had the opportunity to explore issues that directly impact constituents and consider policy responses. As a legislator, mother to two K-12 students, former teacher and education attorney, I have a strong interest in the role that social media plays in the lives of our young people and shaping their experiences and perspectives, from opportunities for connectivity and advocacy to concerns about health and well-being, cyberbullying, and misinformation. This topic warrants our careful consideration. Today's discussion serves as an opportunity to hear from youth health practitioners, social media experts, industry leaders, and policymakers. I'm excited to review our time together. After I introduce our esteemed panelists, we'll hear from Senator Elizabeth Warren on federal efforts regarding social media and youth. I'll then provide an overview of the social media landscape and youth use, as well as current policy initiatives in this space. Each panelist then will provide remarks, and thereafter we'll dialogue across questions that were submitted and advanced by interested stakeholders. So I'm very grateful to be joined by a panel of esteemed experts and professionals in the social media space. Michael Rich is the director and founder of the Digital Wellness Lab and the co-director and founder of the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders at Boston Children's Hospital. Dr. Rich offers research-based, actionable, and practical answers to parents, educators, and clinicians' questions about children's and adolescents' media use and the positive and negative implications for their health and development. Sandra Cortese is a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, a senior research and teaching associate at the University of Zurich, and an adjunct researcher in communication at the Department of Communication and Culture at BI Norwegian Business School. Dr. Cortese's scholarship includes attention on the interconnectedness of youth, the digital landscape, information quality in the news ecosystem, risks to safety and privacy, and spaces for youth participation, civic engagement, and innovation. Alejandro Caraballo is a clinical instructor at Harvard Law School Cyber Law Clinic. Prior to joining the Cyber Law Clinic, she was a staff attorney at the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund and a staff attorney at the LGBTQ Law Project at New York Legal Assistance Group. Last year, she served as a member of GLAAD's Social Media Safety Index Advisory Committee. Hope Ledford is a policy analyst at the Chamber of Progress, a tech industry policy coalition promoting technology's progressive future. Her work reflects her interest in increasing accessibility and promoting inclusivity in technology. The Chamber of Progress aims to promote equitable public policy so that all may benefit from technological innovations. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to your remarks. I'm pleased now to turn to Senator Elizabeth Warren, and I'm grateful for her contribution to this program. Senator Warren has represented Massachusetts in the United States Senate since 2013. She has advocated for greater federal oversight of social media and tech companies, for example, signing on to a January bipartisan letter to Majority Leader Schumer calling for greater regulation of social media platforms and emphasizing mental health and privacy impacts these platforms have had on children. Senator Warren has filed the Digital Consumer Protection Commission Act, which would create a federal commission to regulate and license digital platforms, and is a co-sponsor of the Kids Online Safety Act, federal legislation aimed at protecting minors on social media platforms. I'm glad now to raise up her remarks on efforts in Congress and her work advocating for youth against online harms.
Hello, everyone. Let me start by saying a very special thank you to Representative Lipper-Garabedian for hosting this important conversation on social media and our kids. Right now, a handful of big tech companies generate a majority of the world's internet traffic, and they control nearly every aspect of our digital lives. Platforms are protected from legal liability in many of their decisions, which lets them operate with virtually no accountability. So, what does that look like in practice? Well, it's Instagram promoting harmful ads to our teens. It's Google using its search engine to give a leg up to its own products like Google Hotels and Google Flights. By the way, killing competition and raising prices in the process. Now, I could go on, but you get the picture. Big tech companies have too much unrestrained power in our economy, our society, and our democracy. And that's bad news for kids and for families here in Massachusetts and all across our country. But I've got a bill for that. My bipartisan bill, the Digital Consumer Protection Commission Act, would create an independent agency charged with regulating the nation's biggest tech companies, companies like Meta and Google and Amazon, to prevent online harms, including to our kids, to promote free speech and competition, to guard Americans' privacy, and to protect our national security. It would guarantee that users have the right to know when their personal data is collected and what it's being used for, and it would limit targeted advertising based on personal data. To solve this problem and to protect our kids, we need big structural change, and we need it now. That's why I'm fighting hard for this agency, and it's why it's so important that we have allies like Representative Lipper-Garabedian right here in Massachusetts pushing for what is right. So thank you for having me, and let's keep this fight up.
So teens in the United States do spend a significant portion of their lives engaged with and on social media platforms. On average, close to 80% report spending 2 or more hours each day on social media, scrolling through their feeds, posting updates, interacting with friends and influencers. This level of youth offers both benefits and drawbacks, providing opportunities for communication, self-expression, and community building, but also raising concerns about digital addiction and impacts on mental health, privacy, and safety. As social media continues to evolve and integrate into daily routines, understanding its effects on the well-being of our young people remains an important area for research and for policy attention. As policymakers deliberate on potential legal frameworks for social media and youth, it's worth considering teenagers' opinions of these apps. Teenagers report generally positive or neutral views of their social media use, noting the perceived benefit of using social media outlets to express themselves, share their passions, and engage with others. A Pew Research report demonstrated that about 80% of teens report feeling more connected to their friends through social media, with close to 70% reporting they feel social media assists with more diverse interactions. Additionally, many report that social media fosters feelings of inclusion and confidence for them. While these data points indicate youth feel increased self-esteem, connection with peers, and a sense of belonging, research and lived experience also identify a multitude of challenges that social media pose to youth, encompassing mental and behavioral health, privacy, and safety. So on health, one significant issue is the pressure to maintain a curated online persona, often leading to feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem when comparing oneself to others. The constant exposure to unrealistic standards, cyberbullying, and the addictive nature of social media further compound these challenges. Additionally, excessive screen time can disrupt sleep patterns and hinder real-world social interactions, potentially impacting developmental processes. The intersection of youth and social media further calls to attention a myriad of concerns surrounding privacy. As youth navigate the online landscape, ensuring privacy and promoting transparent practices remain crucial in protecting minors from data collection, targeted advertising, and algorithmic filtering. From privacy breaches of personal information to algorithmic surveillance, unsafe data collection of private information poses significant threats to young users, compromising their privacy and exposing them to potential harm. Indeed, concerns have been raised regarding the exploitation of young users on social media platforms, both by external entities seeking to capitalize on their vulnerabilities and by the platforms themselves, which may prioritize engagement and profit over user well-being. Reports of online child exploitation have raised serious concerns about the safety of our youth in the digital age. In January, for example, social media companies came under congressional scrutiny, called to testify before the U.S. Judiciary Committee in the Senate to address child sexual abuse and exploitation experienced online. Social media companies further were asked to testify over targeted content practices designed to keep youth online with exposure to content promoting eating disorders and perpetuating mental health disorders. Navigating these issues requires a concerted effort from stakeholders like policymakers, health experts, educators, attorneys, parents, and platform developers to safeguard the rights and well-being of young users in the digital age. Both federal and state legislators have introduced measures aimed at regulating social media platforms and safeguarding youth. Senator Warren discussed her pending proposal. Last month, President Biden signed the REPORT Act into law. Among its provisions, the new law requires social media platforms to report child sex trafficking and enticement and increases penalties for platforms that fail to report child sexual abuse material. Legislative activity on social media and youth use has been particularly pronounced at the state level. Policy Proposals in this space have included age verification and parental consent requirements, study commissions and task forces, digital and media literacy curriculum, and social media design code. Last year alone, 35 states and Puerto Rico introduced bills, and 12 states enacted laws or adopted resolutions in this space, adding to laws that had been passed in earlier years. So let's look at a few of the different approaches, and this is just a snapshot and illustrative. So Utah led the nation in enacting legislation in this space that then was quickly challenged in court by a tech industry group on free speech principles. In response, the legislature repealed and replaced its earlier efforts with the Utah Minor Protection and Social Media Act, signed into law this March. The new law requires social media companies to verify the ages of their users and disable certain features on youth accounts. Default privacy settings for minor accounts must restrict access to direct messages and sharing features and disable elements such as autoplay and push notifications that lawmakers argue could lead to excessive use. Legislators have removed a requirement that parents consent to their child opening account, though parents can still access their children's accounts and have grounds to sue a social media company if their child's mental health worsens from excessive use of an algorithmically curated app. In March, Florida enacted one of the country's most restrictive social media laws. The law will prohibit youth under the age of 14 from having social media accounts and require those ages 14 and 15 to receive parental consent before being able to set up accounts. Other states that have legislated parental consent requirements include Arkansas, Louisiana, Ohio, and Texas. In addition to the objections raised on First Amendment grounds, civil rights groups have warned that parental consent could hinder young people from finding support groups and resources on reproductive health, gender identity, or topics. This May, Maryland enacted 2 laws in the space. The Maryland Online Data Privacy Act imposes wide restrictions on how social media companies may collect and consume personal data of users in the state. The Maryland Kids Code prohibits online platforms from tracking any user under the age of 18 or from feeding targeted, addictive content to keep the user online. The highest privacy settings must be default for users under 18. A California law unanimously passed in 2022, the Age Appropriate Design Code, which would require social media and multiplayer video game apps to default to the highest privacy settings for minors, has already been challenged in court and temporarily blocked. New York's governor recently introduced a bill that would prevent social media companies from using algorithms to serve automatic feeds to minors and from sending minors notifications between midnight and 6 a.m. without parental consent. So those are just a few of the examples that are filtering out there in the different state legislatures. Here in the current Massachusetts legislative session, the General Court considered a proposal to create a special commission to investigate the risks of social media to children and recommend a legal framework to promote safe social media use. New Jersey's already established a similar commission. Another bill filed this session to address internet privacy rights for children would empower minors to obtain their internet site and social media content and to have those histories scrubbed. It also would restrict certain product advertising and marketing for products like alcohol, firearms, tobacco, and obscene material on sites or platforms that minors use. And I certainly anticipate, including as our own governor calls upon us to do so, greater attention on the issue in the next legislative session that will begin in January. So with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to our panelists to share more about their work in this space. And I'd love to start with Dr. Rich to talk about the work that you're doing at the Digital Wellness Lab and the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Representative Lipper-Garabedian. I'm Michael Rich. In order of descending importance, I am a parent, a pediatrician, a child health researcher, and the director of the Digital Wellness Lab and the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders, which is the first and I think still the only clinic for kids who've really gotten in trouble with online gaming, with social media, with pornography, or with what we call information binging, which is the endless YouTube videos or Quora or Reddit, and often a combination of the two. A couple of things that I would like to throw out there to think about. First of all, of all these laws that are flying around, I think Maryland's is the most intact or on track at the moment. I don't know the ones in Massachusetts yet, but the idea is really to have transparency, both on the business side, but also on the side of where their information is going, what data they're collecting, what information, and where that's going. there are a couple of things that concern me about things like the age-appropriate design code. I think it is very well intentioned, but as an expert in child development, I think that I have to be clear to say that all kids of 13 are not the same. And so I think just doing this by age is problematic, at least from a scientific standpoint. Secondly, the term appropriate is going to be very different in Massachusetts than it is in Texas and Florida, because it's a values-laden one. It's a cultural, preconception, if you will. I much prefer to think about this as developmentally optimal for kids. The advantage of that is it not only recognizes that kids of the same age aren't the same, but it includes those kids who are neurodivergent, who in many ways are cut out completely from these sort of age-based decisions. Parents know their kids better than anybody. And I think that what we really need to do is educate and empower parents, kids, educators all around to really understand this. And there are a couple of movements going forward about, for example, smartphones in schools. First of all, I hate the word ban, because I think the word ban makes the hackles on everybody's rise, right? But if we think about these as incredibly powerful tools, in fact, over 1 million times more powerful than the computer that landed Apollo 11 on the moon, and it's sitting in our kids' pockets and is 99.9% distraction, and that it affects not only their didactic learning of math, science, and et cetera in the classroom, but it really affects their social emotional learning, because school is the first chance they have to be individuals in a society, to come upon issues, challenges, resolve them, figure them out for themselves. And if a parent is in their head all day through the smartphone asking them, how did lunch go? Is that kid still picking on you in the playground? What did you get on the quiz? Like Jiminy Cricket sitting on Pinocchio's shoulder. I think that we are missing out on a huge opportunity for them to establish themselves as individuals, and also to distract them from the free play that is truly the best developmental exercise they can do. So I just want to introduce everybody to the idea of the Digital Wellness Lab, which is in some ways an audaciously contrarian approach to what's happened in the past, which is that we are seeking to build a foundation of good, solid evidence where all of the stakeholders can come together, and see what would happen if we put a pediatrician next to a software engineer, next to a neuroscientist, next to a screenwriter, and let them all bring their respective skill sets to bear on working this problem that, frankly, we all share. And an effort in that direction is basically something we have proposed to the tech companies, which is the Inspired Internet Pledge, which asks them to sign on to an aspirational pledge, not a binding one, but an aspirational pledge to tune their product for emotional wellness, to listen to and respond to those who have encountered harm online, and finally to share information with each other about what helps and what doesn't help. And the idea is, first of all, maybe they can get themselves out of the corner that they're painted into as if they're big tobacco, as Senator Blumenthal says, but to actually get to a place where we can exercise the immense power, the immense opportunity that these devices and platforms use, and not encounter harm. I applaud all the legislation and litigation, but another part of me says it's an incredible waste of energy and resources that could be applied to truly understanding this and cleaning up our own act. As the Hopi elders advised us, we are the ones we've been waiting for.
Well, don't talk me out of a job yet, Dr. Rich, but thank you so much.
Oh, we still need you. We still need you. You
Okay.
can come over to the lab too and play with us.
I appreciate the invitation. I'll try to take you up on that. Let's turn now to Dr. Cortese. Thank you again for being here. Love to hear a little bit about your work at the Berkman Klein Center and the research, legal research you're doing on the intersection of youth, social media, and challenges in the digital world.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for the invitation. It's always terrible to follow Michael because he is usually the person I call upon when I have questions about this. But let me give it a shot. So my name is Sandra Cortesi. I am the director of the Youth and Media Project, as just mentioned, based at the Berkman Klein Center in the University of Zurich. I work closely with different stakeholders, as does Michael, from different fields, looking at the challenges and opportunities connected to the digital environment. I often say we lean towards the opportunities, but we explore it on balance. We study young people ages 12 to 18, so in the US, the equivalent to middle and high school students across a range of topics that are social media relevant. So we look at privacy, well-being, creativity, and learning. So very different topics at the intersection of different technologies even. So we have done this for, I would say, almost 20 years. We started with mobile phones, social media for sure. But I would say the last 5 years, most of my brain power is occupied, particularly with artificial intelligence, but we're also exploring more emerging technologies like virtual and augmented reality or the metaverse. I think what sets us apart from many, and that's maybe also where to or it helps contextualize some of our inputs, is we do participatory research with young people, meaning middle and high school students come after school to hang out with us at Youth and Media, and we integrate. So we see young people really as partners in this effort, and we integrate young people into all steps of the research process, meaning even the topics we choose to study at Youth and Media have often been selected by youth or with youth. And I think that is crucial because of two things. One, it really helps us see things from different perspectives. I feel like the voices of young people are so often missed in these conversations, not only today, but more broadly speaking. So seeing things from different perspectives. And two, it really helps me see my own blind spots, but also see kind of what young people's blind spots could be. Social media has been a topic of study for many years, I would say since 2006, so a long time. It started with Facebook, exploring how young people were using Facebook at the time, and then much of the exploration has been around platform diversification. So did young people move from one social media platform to the other, or did they start to use multiple at the same time? And currently looking at what social media platforms are most popular. As Michael said, while we focus on a specific age range, we also understand that young people are not a homogeneous group. So we look at different variables that impact social media use, could be age, race, gender identity, you name it. A lot of our work, as you can hear from my accent, is global. So we study this in the US and also other parts of the world. We look at why young people use social media. So I think that is important to understand. You mentioned a couple of points at the beginning, but I think the diversity of reasons is important to consider. And we study also how they use it. So some of the behaviors that currently are very front and center of the debate may lean towards more passive usage. Michael was mentioning it, like scrolling, endless scrolling, but we also look at young people that use social media more actively or more participatory. What does that look like? And last point, we look at young people that don't use social media, which I think is increasingly important. There are young people that are no longer opening accounts. And so we study why that is the case. And overall, what's the value proposition of social media in young people's lives? What kind of added value do these social media platforms bring to the lives of young people? Maybe two last points. As I said, more recently, I would say the last 3, 4, 5 years, we have been looking at the intersection of social media and AI. I think they're particularly interested in kind of how young people are using some of these newer tools, generative AI tools, to create content, ultimately thinking about enhancing young people's creativity, and a question mark around the question, will it enhance young people's participation? We do look at some of the challenges, for instance, around information quality. So how do these new AI tools impact how young people find, evaluate, share, and create information? And then last point I wanted to make is, while a couple of new laws or bills and so forth were introduced earlier, we try to look at kind of the whole toolbox, which I think is really important. Yes, law and policies are important, and it's important that we think about these power imbalances, commercial interests, and so forth. But as a psychologist, I am also extremely passionate about education and how do we increase young people's knowledge and skills. Not only young people, we can also talk about parents and other people in this space, but how do we kind of use the whole toolbox and collaboratively co-create kind of the futures we want. Thank you.
I must
Thank
say
you very
also
much.
that Sandra is an incredible collaborator and partner in this effort. And there's actually an effort to bring together across the entire Harvard University all of the groups that are working on this issue. The Center for Digital Thriving at the Ed School, the Education School. There's a group at the Business School that's working on this. So I think what we're trying to do is get out of our parallel play and start working together and synergize with each other. So this is a real resource to the citizens of Massachusetts and beyond.
Absolutely. Great. Let's turn now to Alejandro Caraballo. I would love for you to talk a little bit about your work in cyber law and the attention you put on the intersectionality of social media and certain communities like the LGBTQ community and other marginalized groups. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me. This is an incredibly complex area, particularly when law and policy are involved. And one of the things that I've primarily worked on over the last year or two are working with partner organizations and clients to kind of look at the policy and legal landscape of all these bills that are passing. You mentioned a few already. Some like Florida that set a new ban for social media for children under the age of 14. There's been these other age verification bills. One that in Kansas that passed referenced material harmful to minors, which is some of the language that we've seen, which really is almost seemingly trying to get at what are called the content-based regulations. And those are problematic from a First Amendment standpoint, because if you're trying to target particular content from a government perspective, then it is much, much harder to survive judicial scrutiny. And so some of the issues with that, like in the Kansas law, it pulled a definition of material harmful to minors from the criminal code, which also includes just the word homosexuality. And because enforcement is, in most of these state laws, the enforcement is pretty much given entirely to the attorneys generals in these in their respective states, there are very, very strong concerns about how these laws, in particular in certain states such as Texas, Florida, even Kansas, could be weaponized and targeted against certain communities, particularly the LGBTQ community. And so, there are particular concerns that it would target LGBTQ content online, would age gate it and put it behind age verification requirements, or even just essentially making it impossible for anyone to access. Because when you add in age verification, you have to add age verification for everyone. And then there's additional concerns about anonymity and protecting the right to anonymity online. And so there's a whole host of policy issues that come into this that make it very, very difficult. And most of the bills that have passed in various states, have significant drawbacks, particularly with Florida's bill that just bans it outright for under 14, although it's not much different from COPPA, which the Children Online Privacy and Protection Act, which bans social media use under 13. But as we know, there are children under 13 that are on social media sites anyways. So it remains to be seen how effective those are. Additionally, with age or parental requirements and consent requirements, there's concerns about potentially isolating youth away from their friends and their communities. And it could be a means of abuse by parents to further isolate their children. So there's all of these kinds of concerns that come into play. And then there's kind of the national bill, COSA, which, my personal capacity, I very strenuously opposed, because even in its most modern incarnation, because it would empower state attorneys general to kind of go after it. In some ways it would be a good thing, but in other ways, like, do you really want someone like the Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton to decide what kids can and can't see on a particular basis, right? Especially when he's utilized his powers under just general business law in Texas to seek the healthcare records of trans youth in out of state in Seattle, in Washington, and gone after LGBTQ organizations trying to get their records to target the trans community. And so when we've seen those kinds of weaponized partisan ways that state attorneys general have used their offices, there's a huge concern that they would weaponize new federal powers to be able to go after social media companies and go after content they don't like. And this is not a hypothetical. Just last year, a group of state attorneys general sent a letter to Target saying that they would be in violation of child protection and child welfare laws for continuing to sell Pride merchandise at their stores. So this is not really a hypothetical here. They're really going after LGBTQ content online, and not just for children. Children are really just kind of the pretense and the use to get at regulating this content. And so really what this means is there needs to be smart policy on this that really ensures that various groups are brought in as stakeholders to inform this policy and aren't cut out of the policy considerations. And additionally, I think the emphasis and focus on children has really distracted from the broader issue that these social media companies are basically weaponizing and utilizing our information against us. When you don't pay for a service, you are the product. And we do not have fundamental privacy laws at all. We have no ability to restrict this, right? So there's been bills to try and ban TikTok because there are concerns that they're selling or giving privacy or private data to the Chinese government. The Chinese government could just come in and buy it from data brokers. There would be no need for them to go through TikTok to get it. So this kind of concern is distracting from the fundamental issue that we do not have any privacy legislation that protects us. And there's a long way to go around this conversation that we need to protect youth, but I think we also need to protect adults and make sure that they also have their privacy protected and aren't subjected to kind of this gamification of product design that creates these very addictive products that impact a lot of people, not just youth. And we definitely want to, put the emphasis and the importance on youth because we want to protect them. But I think also it can serve as a distraction away from the broader issue that these social media companies have entirely too much power over our private information and data.
And that's a great plug for a community conversation I did last year on privacy in the digital age, which looked more broadly at policy considerations at both federal and state level around digital data privacy. So thank you for raising that issue.
Can I add to that how incredibly important these spaces are for kids, and especially LGBTQIA plus kids, to find their tribe, to find their people. These kids, in my clinical experience, are marginalized, isolated, bullied, and often really tortured by others if they don't have this opportunity to reach out and be with people who validate, understand, and love them.
Thank you. So let's turn now to Hope Ledford from Chamber of Progress to talk about your perspective, the Chamber's perspective on appropriate tech business practices and government involvement. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this important topic. It's through conversations like these that we can work together to create a safer, more inclusive future for everyone. My name is Hope Ledford. I'm a policy analyst at Chamber of Progress, which is a center-left technology association focused on fostering inclusive public policies where everyone can benefit from technological advancements. I'm also a proud member of Gen Z. Chamber of Progress's partners listed on our website have no veto or vote over our positions. Our goal, shared with many parents, caregivers, and legislators, is to prioritize youth safety online and offline. However, much of recent legislation may do more harm than good and face constitutional challenges, as previously mentioned. I want to start by discussing the profound impact of social media on my own life. I created my Instagram account around the age of 13, which initially helped me feel more connected with my peers at school. Over time, it broadened my understanding of the world and fueled my passion for activism and politics. Through the internet, I have joined electoral campaigns. I've felt empowered by the stories of other Asian American women amidst a rise of Asian hate during the pandemic, celebrated with my queer family members and friends, and found community during times of isolation and mental health struggles. However, I'm also aware of its downsides, such as hate speech and threats to our democracy, and the unkind, harmful language that can cause great pain. These issues reflect broader crises our youth face today. Improving our world, both online and offline, starts with common sense policies and solutions to foster safer and more inclusive environments and opportunities where youth can thrive, rather than limiting them. So Chamber of Progress has reviewed state and federal legislation over the past few months, finding it often well-intentioned, but ultimately misguided and potentially harming young people in three main areas: age verification and age-appropriate design code, or AADC, parental consent requirements and content moderation, and limitations on algorithmic feeds. So first, I'll start with age verification and AADC, which is central to many bills, and they impose vague best interest or duty of care requirements on platforms, often leading to overly cautious restrictions and content over moderation. As previously mentioned, these measures face legal challenges, particularly regarding the First Amendment. Age verification requires significant data collection, conflicting with data reduction efforts and eroding privacy for both adults and marginalized groups, including people of color and the LGBTQ+ community. Also, many Americans don't have valid IDs or are unwilling to share personal information, which could be weaponized against them. All in all, this data collection also threatens cybersecurity, especially for LGBTQ+ platforms, increasing the risks of cyberbullying, doxing, blackmail, and offline violence, making these companies prime targets for ransomware attacks. Red states have recently implemented age verification, whereas blue states like Vermont and Maryland have adopted AADC. However well-intentioned, AADC's duty of care and liability provisions still result in de facto age verification and excessive content moderation, depriving youth of vital resources and support. Secondly, parental consent requirements and content moderation can endanger youth by giving parents extensive control over their children's online accounts, cutting off vital resources for marginalized youth. Not all parents are best suited to control their kids' activity online, or do they have their best interests at heart. In fact, only 38% of LGBTQ+ youth come from supportive homes, and consent laws risk exposing youth in non-affirming environments to discrimination and mental health challenges. And content moderation aimed at restricting harmful or obscene content can lead to discriminatory censorship and restrict access to constitutionally protected speech and essential resources. As mentioned, legislators with anti-LGBTQ+ agendas could misuse these laws to silence voices and cut off vital support systems. And our last concern is with legislative efforts aimed at replacing algorithms with chronological feeds. However, algorithms are crucial for online safety. Chronological feeds increase the likelihood of a bullied child encountering harmful content from classmates, while algorithmic feeds can curate safer, preferred content. Algorithms can detect and mitigate hate speech, misinformation, cyberbullying, and predatory behavior. Mandating chronological feeds could hinder platforms' ability to filter harmful content, making it much harder to protect children. In conclusion, these key points highlight the profound implications implications of regulation on youth access to online platforms, especially for marginalized communities such as youth of color, youth with disabilities, and LGBTQ+ youth. Inclusive discussions are necessary when advocating for legislation around this policy issue. A thoughtful policy approach should prevent exacerbating or alienating vulnerable youth by fostering cooperation between both the public and private sectors, utilizing existing tools for online safety, and investing in youth mental health and educational resources. It is also crucial to address the challenges and crises impacting youth offline. So all in all, we remain committed to collaborating with all stakeholders to ensure to balance ensuring youth safety and also harnessing technology's benefits. Thank you again, Representative, for the opportunity to participate in today's discussion.
Great. Thank you, Hope. All right, so let's open it up for, cross conversation and dialogue around some of the questions that we were asked in advance. And you all touched on this a little bit in some of your opening remarks, but curious to talk a little bit about what are some of the most significant trends that you see shaping youth behavior on social media today? And maybe we'll couple that with the second question about whether different social media platforms sort of impact mental health and well-being of young users in different ways based on sort of how youth are using the platforms.
I'd love to respond to that from my patient's view. I think that where young people get into trouble on social media is when they use it not to be a friend, but to market themselves to the world, much the way the corporations do, where they show only their best of their lives, that their great vacation they went on, or their dad's new sports car, or their hot new boyfriend. And it creates a competitive environment. Likes exacerbate that. I think that it is not that social media is doing things to kids, but what kids are doing with social media that gets them into trouble or helps them, in fact, because those data that you showed about increasing mental health problems with excessive use, that's actually a J-shaped result where the kids who actually have the most mental health are the ones who use it for about 2 hours a day. It's actually better than the kids who are not on social media at all, and it's certainly better than the kids who are using it a lot. So I think that what we really need to do, while very much seeking to control the tech companies and control what they are doing with our data, et cetera, but also to empower the young people to be authentic online. One of my dreams, perhaps, is that if kids can be authentic, as in talking about their true selves, their strengths and their limitations, their concerns, their fears, we will come closer to the way we truly make friends, the way we create friends that we can depend on in the middle of the night. We lost a lot when friend became a verb. And I think that we need to step back and say, how can we use this to enhance our humanity, to support our mental health, and to really raise us all up? And the dream actually is that if there's a kid in Ukraine and a kid in Russia who are, online with each other being true, and their leaders say that is the enemy, they'll say, forget about it. I know the enemy better than I know you as my leader. And being a pediatrician and an occupational hazard is optimism, but that is my hope for social media, that is not going to go away, but we need to shape it to our needs and our health.
Thank you. Others?
I can quickly add, I think one of the things we're seeing with social media in particular is kind of more of a segmentation or fragmentation, where younger users are going more into kind of like closed bubbles that are like less accessible. So think of Discord chats, Signal groups, WhatsApp groups, even smaller things like subreddit or bigger things like subreddits. And really, these are just kind of more places where they can be themselves without being, potentially subjected to like going massively viral. And they can communicate more closely with their friends in a more like, constrained way. And so that's one of the things I've definitely seen. And additionally, there's been this kind of growing TikTokification where it's mostly driven by this central algorithm, and it's becoming less and less about connecting you with your friends and more about having kind of this central feed from like kind of 1% of content creators that, you know, get most of the engagement or most of the views on these social media sites. So actually they're starting to mimic more like traditional media, where you have a handful of content creators basically creating all of the content that people see on their screens, and they're actually participating far less posting their own content. And over the last few years, we've actually seen a dramatic decline in engagement across all social media platforms, but particularly among TikTok. So the kind of usage is actually going down across the board.
When you say use, do you mean both consumption and your own content creation, or are you talking more about people are providing less of their own content and just consuming more of that 1%?
Yeah, I would say it's both. So people are generally less creating their own content and posting their own content online and sharing their own content, and they're also consuming less of overall. We've seen like basically every major social media company just have less engagement overall, in combination with declining advertising rates have made it, basically like social media has generally been kind of in decline for the last year or two.
Got it.
Maybe to connect the two inputs, kind of the importance of being more authentic and kind of this participation gap. At a meta level, I think one additional observation is that the types of devices young people are using to go online. So there is kind of a shift towards mobile phones primarily and almost only. And if you think about the types of activities we would want young people to be doing, from learning to Hope was mentioning being like a kind of a very active, civically engaged participant, how much of that is possible on a phone? Yes, the phones are improving, but still, I think that does matter. On the positive side, I think access conditions overall are improving also for young people, which I think is important. What I would be curious about is kind of our collective views on how, kind of why young people may not be participating as much anymore. Is it kind of on the positive side, much more awareness about kind of some of the downsides? We spoke about privacy earlier, misinformation and so forth. Or is it our collective pressure on them to kind of perform and us constantly watching? And is that maybe one of the reasons? But we definitely, I wouldn't want young people to feel pressure to be more authentic, but the technologies are shifting to make that more possible. So we see, for instance, young people posting many more stories instead of posts, or leaning towards platforms where content is there just for a specific moment of time, or as Alejandra was saying, going to smaller channels where maybe they are more among themselves. But I would be curious also what others say, like why this shift is happening.
Yeah, I don't think I can't speak fully for that for the shift, but I do think that one thing that my generation is excels at is setting boundaries, both online and offline. And I think part of that is curating what our social media feeds, what we want to see, and who we want to interact with. I think that different social media platforms differently affect the mental health and well-being of young users. Some people use it for self-expression, others use it for community building. And then, of course, there is the access to support networks. But I want to point out something that is often overlooked, and it's the way that social media has been a vital lifeline for youth with disabilities, and also a safe space for neurodiverse teens to socialize. So for individuals who are deaf or to individuals with chronic illnesses, teens with disabilities have found connection and community on social media. And it's been a valuable way to communicate for augmentative and alternative communication users. And so visual platforms like Instagram, I know have helped those who struggle with text-based communication. So not only just in terms of building community, but also being able to communicate with others has been a huge trend that we've been seeing.
Great. We've talked, I think a couple of you touched on sort of empowering youth and also thinking about parents and families, and that, it's going to look different for every family. But to the degree that some of the ways in which we structure our use and consumption of social media is really about our own empowerment and preferences, what are strategies that you might recommend parents and guardians or, older teens really be thinking about when they're on social media?
Well, I guess I'll jump in as I often do. I actually just published a book for parents and caregivers called The Mediatrician's Guide, a joyful approach to raising healthy, smart, kind kids in a screen-saturated world. But in a nutshell, I can take that, several hundred pages and say, first of all, I think it's really important that parents have expectations rather than rules. And the reason for that is that kids should have expectations of their parents as much as the parents have expectations of the kids. Rules are, to many kids, made to be broken. I was one of those. I know that. And you break a rule and mom or dad is angry at you and that goes away. But if you don't meet their expectations, they're disappointed in you, which is much more potent in many ways. I talk about in the book, I talk about in our work, the 3 M's of parenting. Model the behavior that you want to see in your kids. So don't be staring at your smartphone with, that all important email from the boss while yelling at your kid to turn off Grand Theft Auto. That's the height of hypocrisy. The second is mentor them. We just hand these smartphones and tablets to a screaming 4-year-old. We would never throw them the car keys and say, have at it. But an automobile, like a smartphone, is a power tool, and there are implications to it that we need to wait until they need the power tool. Congratulations to Kate for not giving her 11-year-old a phone. Let's think about it as a power tool that's used when it's needed to be used, to use it responsibly and with respect for themselves and each other, and to sit down next to your child with each new device, each new platform, each new application, and do it with them. Parent them in the digital space. Be a presence in their digital space, so that they know that you care, and they also know that if something weird comes up on their screen, and it will, that they can come to you for support, explanation, and help, not something that they need to hide away. And speaking of which, the 3rd M is monitor. This is the one that parents and kids both push back on. Parents, because they say they don't have the time to monitor everything that they do, but the kids, because they say, I want my privacy. Well, the reality of this is that 13-year-old is still more than a decade away from having the neurodevelopment and the executive function to really understand privacy as something more than just so mom and dad can't see. But if parents have their kids' usernames, have their kids' passwords, and can monitor them, the kids' behavior is different. This doesn't mean you have to monitor them all the time, or maybe even not at all, but that also allows you to be present in their lives. And the goodies are that you get 2 more M's when you do that. They achieve mastery of these powerful tools, that they use for what they do well and turn them off when they're not the best tool for the job, so they're not doom scrolling. And finally, to make memories. I don't remember anything I do on screen. I remember what I do in person with other people, the way their face looks, the way they feel when we're running through the woods in the autumn, or even just cooking a meal together. So 3 M's get you 2 great M's.
Okay, great. I do want to give time for anyone else to answer this question, but I'm also mindful of your time. And selfishly, I'd like to skip to the final question on this slide, because I've heard from each of you some concerns about current government approaches in terms of law at the state level or bills that are being considered at Congress. I'm wondering where you think there may be an appropriate role for the government to play in sort of thinking about issues that we acknowledge exist on social media, like misinformation, potential health impacts on our youth, cyberbullying, and to Alejandra's point, digital privacy broadly for all folks of all ages. So where do you, what would you suggest would be potentially some valid and effective ways in which the government might interact with this and think about regulating it?
Yeah.
Connect,
Oh.
go ahead. I could connect the two, but so maybe you go ahead and then I connect the threads.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'll quickly respond. But yeah, so we emphasize the importance of engaging various stakeholders, including the government, in discussions about addressing some of these online issues. And the most important thing that legislators can do is pass legislation to address specific harms, such as holding the creators of non-consensual intimate imagery responsible for their conduct. And that will help bring relief to victims. In contrast, mandates like age verification and AADC not only directly conflict with established legal precedent, but they also can infringe on young people's speech or limit their access to important resources. So all in all, I think investing in mental health resources and education for parents and young users is essential to create healthy online spaces. But the government can play a role in addressing specific and specific harms that do not further infringe on other rights.
Sandra?
I was just going to say both on the parents' end as they exercise the 3M, as well as on the government side. One thing to do is actually base your decisions or your choices or whatever you come up with make it based on actual evidence. Do not let kind of the loud voices or whatever is currently the latest flavor topic guide your choices and decisions. And for parents as well, make sure you actually listen to your child and understand what's going on and what the child is doing. It can be really deceiving looking at it as you see your child just engaging with a specific device. But learn the rules behind the game and learn the details and collect evidence and make your choices and decisions based on that. Support others who are collecting evidence, ideally as well.
And I'll add in, I think one of the most important ways is to mandate access to researchers, for researchers to actually get the information and access to these platforms. Because I think one of the main difficulties that exists right now is that essentially most of these platforms are essentially like a black box. Like researchers can't really get an idea of like what is going on at a broader level unless the platforms give them access. And when they do, there can be strings attached or conditions that make it hard to do kind of non-biased research in this area. And as we've seen, actually, platforms have gone away from having transparent tools. Meta is closing down one of its main access tools. I'm forgetting the name. CrowdTangle. Twitter basically made its API inaccessible, and then so allowing researchers to have access to that data so we can actually better inform the public policy to actually see what is happening at the basic level. So I think we all are concerned about youth, but if we don't actually know the basis for what's causing harms on these platforms, the policy may be misinformed, and then we end up creating policies that end up backfiring and creating unintended consequences. I think the other thing, just from my own experience on this, there's legislation, I think, that's been introduced about preventing doxing online. I've had to counsel families who've had youth that are targeted online through networked harassment, who are getting their information posted online and doxed. And these are just minors and youth that are just being targeted in horrific ways. And there's really no recourse to stop that kind of information from being posted online and used in a way to go after people. So I think, providing recourse for people to go after those who post doxing information with the intent for harassment.
And fund that research and follow up with the findings, particularly around building digital literacy in both the young people and the parents, and frankly, the legislators. So I think that we all need to be educated and empowered and work together towards solving this.
Great. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I'd love to continue another hour of this conversation to unpack it further and get even more tools from my toolbox when my boys come home today. But I think that we can turn now to the last slide, which shows sort of where viewers can go to contact my office for additional information and learn more about each of our guests' organizations' online presences. I want to thank each of you so much for joining me today, and to those of you viewing this community conversation, whether in real time or in the days to come. It's certainly a lot of food for thought for me and others, and I'm looking forward to continuing to stay in touch on these topics. So stay tuned for the recording of this discussion and for all upcoming community conversation events. Thank you all so much, and be well.